obviously really important to acknowledge the country that we're on. From a Monash perspective, very important that in the spirit of reconciliation, the Monash Entrepreneurship Portfolio acknowledges the traditional custodians of the country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay respect to their elders past and present and emerging, and we also wish to acknowledge the people of the Kulin Nations on whose land Monash University operates, and pay our respects to the traditional owners of the land from which our attendees join today. From a Beyond Blue perspective, I also wanted to add a little bit of an extra acknowledgement there. So obviously you can see Greg and I together and we're at the BB Hub. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that we're actually on contested land. So there's a few groups that I'd like to acknowledge specifically, which is the Boonwurrung and Wurundjeri Woiwurrung peoples of the Eastern Kulin Nation. At Beyond Blue, we also acknowledge those who are living with and managing mental health conditions such as anxiety, depression, also their families and friends and supporters, and those that are affected by suicide. So with those acknowledgements, I just wanted to start off by giving you a bit of a piece on why this session I think is important. And the reason for that is we've got a lot of budding entrepreneurs, people that are interested in entrepreneurship. We've got entrepreneurs on the line or people in industry who are working with them. But really, we've also just got a lot of humans who experience the spectrum of mental health every day. And so the reason why we've got these brilliant panelists, which I'm going to introduce you to in a minute, is because they cover quite a few of those pockets. So we've got startup lenses here. We've got people who come from very different backgrounds from a psychology perspective, clinical, organizational, but we're also all very involved in supports and services and research that is really looking at how we can better support this space as well. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. So I might start on the left of my screen with Matthew Defina, who is from Man Cave. So Matthew, with your intro, obviously tell us who you are more as a person, how, you know, a bit about like what you do and how you go about things, and then a little bit about Man Cave if you can.
All right, thanks, Caro, and great to see you all here. I'm joining you from a very cold office in Collingwood. Having a warehouse in Collingwood is cool, but also come winter, it's very chilly. So yeah, I'm actually hugging a heater. You probably can't see, just right next to my lap here, just to stay warm. But a bit more about me. I'm the organizational psychologist in the room, and I grew up in Melbourne. My background is very much between playing outdoors and actually like scuba diving, skiing, water polo, cricket, all the things outdoors, and then also grew up with a mum who's very big into clinical psychology, leadership, culture work. And so I spent most of my life up to this point trying to work out how to bring all those things together, which as you can imagine is pretty hard. So I'm the kind of person that tries to pack a lot into a weekend. We'll get up at 5:30 if I want to or need to exercise, have a coffee and have time to read before getting to work. So my well-being strategies very much revolve around not booking things in on my weekends and actually having space and time to relax and connect with people, and unhooking from that hustle mentality. In terms of background, I studied at Melbourne Uni, decided that organizational psychology was something I was really passionate about, mainly because I was frustrated with the what felt like a lot of the negative lenses that were brought to some psych disciplines, and when I'm not getting energy from this. Whereas when I started to listen and hear about strengths-based psychology, positive psychology, how we impact communities and systems and organizations, I got really excited. And there was an analogy early on that was given to me about a fish in a bowl, and that if you take a dirty fish out of a dirty fish bowl and you clean the fish, but don't clean the bowl and put it back in there, eventually it's going to get dirty again. So how can we make sure that when we take the fish out of the bowl, that we also clean the fish bowl? And by that, I mean the system and environment that fish lives within, so that when it goes back in, it can be its best fish self. And the same for humans. So that basically led me to doing work in gender stereotypes and leadership at Deakin Uni for my master's, looking at how gender stereotypes impact our ability to lead, and also looking at burnout and engagement in workplaces. And so eventually I worked in corporate consulting, and then stayed involved with the Man Cave through social entrepreneur networks. And there was a full-time role that came up and I couldn't resist a few years ago. So took up the role as head of programs after being a facilitator for Man Cave. And so at Man Cave, we exist because we got really frustrated around 2014 when we looked at what was going on with men's mental health, and especially realizing that a lot of solutions were crisis management focused. And there was nothing further upstream that was looking at how we prevent these statistics occurring in the first place. And really, when we looked deeper into it, it was actually that mental health challenges that men were having wasn't because of mental health for themselves. It was actually because of this masculine stereotype, this masculine identity that was reinforced and built up through high school. So we decided to work with 12 to 16-year-old boys, and we really haven't steered from that since we started. We've now worked with 18,000 boys running full-day workshops where we bring in healthy male role models to take them through a rite of passage process and get them talking openly about masculinity, what it actually means, how it impacts them, and giving them a chance to talk in front of their mates and redefine their relationships with each other. We're now also doing teacher training. We're also launching a YouTube channel, TikTok and Snapchat channel that is for the boys. So adults, stay away. It's still cool for now. And we're also just launching a hygiene brand for men called Stuff, which is a for-purpose, for-profit brand that's separate to Man Cave that we have a stakeholder share in. So that's a brief spiel. There's a few things in there, but yeah, really happy to be with you today. Thanks, Kara.
Thank you. All right, over to Addie Wooten from Smiling Mind.
Hi, everyone. Thanks, Caro. There's so many similarities, Matt, between, but I am the clinical psychologist in the room, so there's an obvious difference. Maybe it took me a bit longer to see the light, I think. So I'm the CEO of Smiling Mind. I'm a clinical psych by background. I actually, well, if we're going all the way back, I grew up in northern New South Wales, actually. And I've lived most of my life in Melbourne since moving down here when how old was I? I was 15 when I moved to Melbourne, but I still think that I'm a country New South Wales person, really. And for me, my journey to get to Smiling Mind is a bit circuitous. So I actually started working in the clinical health space. So I was actually working in big hospitals, in oncology, so working with people with cancer, and I'm really interested, I think, from my perspective, to understand that, how do people cope with big life events that are out of their control, and looking at the differences between, some people absolutely thrive and are amazing. They use these opportunities, chances and experiences as a transformative process, and other people really struggle with them. And for the majority of people, there's a combination of the two. It's, a huge struggle, but there's growth that comes along the way. And so I was really interested to understand, what is it about people that actually changes the way we cope with these big events. I did a doctorate in clinical psych, actually focused mostly on masculinity, so really digging into men as well, because I was also really curious to understand, why do men not seek help, and what are the barriers there? So that there's probably heaps we could talk about there as well. And I started growing an interest in the digital space, really as a tool to overcome those barriers. How do we get people connecting with others? How do we engage people in thinking about new ideas and learning new things? And is technology does it have a role to play in helping to overcome those barriers? And so I started building digital products in my hospital role, which is an interesting process because hospitals are not particularly innovative or entrepreneurial. So anyone out there who is in a hospital setting, good luck to you. But amazing opportunity to try and shift and change things. And the opportunity to take on the role at Smiling Mind came up really for me through networks and connections. I had the fortune of meeting one of our founders, and I was hooked. I thought, oh my goodness, there's something here that could actually be really transformational. When I joined Smiling Mind, or when I was talking to them in the early days, they had reached almost 900,000 people, and I was like, oh my God, you've got 900,000 people on your app. That's amazing. You know, in my clinical work I was so excited to get 400 people participating in my program. And so jump forward about 5 years, we've now got 6.2 million people using the app, which is just like, we never thought that we would get to that scale. And we'll probably talk about it, but we do lots of different pieces of work. So we do work in schools, and kids is a main focus of our work. We're really trying to equip people or kids with skills that will help them navigate all of those challenges and build a really good relationship with their mental health. So similar to what Matt was talking about, you know, how do we take a positive strengths-based approach to mental health and build, you know, a good relationship with our mental health, so we're not afraid of feeling stress, of feeling anger, of feeling sadness. We're all going to feel those feelings. But then over time, we've also evolved, and we have programs in businesses and workplaces. We've developed a small business program, and we have a whole range of programs for parents with kids as well, and teachers. We do a lot of professional development training with teachers. So our vision really is, well, it is to help every mind thrive, and that really is about how do we equip people with the skills, the tools, the mindset, and the behaviour to support good mental health. Yeah, so that's me in a nutshell. I'm sure we'll chat more about heaps of things.
We definitely will, Addie, and it's really interesting even just hearing you talk about Smiling Mind, because you preempted a lot of some of the questions that people have sent through in advance. So I think you're all going to get your your questions answered for sure. Lucky last, I've got Greg here sitting with me, Greg Jennings from Beyond Blue. So Greg, do you want to introduce yourself and a bit about what we do at Beyond Blue, but more specifically what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. And firstly, thank you for having me along today. It's a pleasure to come and speak to you all. So I'm not a psychologist. I'm going to say that up front. I have a background in behavioural science and wellbeing science, but I'm not a clinician. And I think that's important because a lot of the ways that we support the community is not through clinical interventions. And so that's some of the perspective that I'll bring today. So I'm the head of wellness and prevention at Beyond Blue. So at Beyond Blue, we're Australia's most recognised mental health organisation. And my role is, while I'm not a psychologist, I am very much aligned with Addie and with Matt in terms of adopting a positive and strengths-based approach to building mental health and wellbeing. So our vision is to help all Australians achieve their best possible mental health. I've also worked extensively with the small business community. So I've worked with the small business community for about 15 years. Originally, I worked for federal government, and my role was about really promoting cooperative, productive, compliant workplace relations. And I really got interested in behaviour change. How can we support workplaces and small business owners to change their behaviour for the better? And in particular, as my interest in behaviour change grew, I started to really focus on, well, how can we apply these methodologies? How can we encourage positive behaviour change, which contributes to people's well-being? And that actually led me here to Beyond Blue. We do a lot of fantastic work, but one of our really key areas of focus is supporting the small business community. And we know after, a really tough 12 months for everyone, but particularly for the small business community, these types of services are needed now more than ever. I'll end on just one point. In workplace mental health, what we talk about a lot is, the 1 in 5 people who every year are likely to experience a mental health condition. I think the perspective that both myself, but also Addie and Matt are bringing to today's discussion is, how can we design workplaces? How can we design small businesses? How can we design new endeavours for the 5 in 5 people? Like, how can we design for everyone that you're going to come into contact with to help everyone achieve their best mental health?
Amazing. Thanks, Greg. So, first of all, you've now got 3 businesses that you can tap into to better understand mental health and how to support your mental health. And there's a whole range of programs that these guys run to support you, which is one of the questions that we got asked. So there's your first hot tip. But quite a few of you started talking about individuals and mentioned, kind of understanding your journey as an individual. So I think that's where I'd love to start the conversation. So I'll just jump in whichever of you kind of wants to answer first up. But if we're starting with the individual, how can people start on that journey of understanding themselves and their own mental health journey, particularly when they are, potentially going into new endeavors or to new big roles? We've got a lot of students on the call as well. What are some of the things that you think is a good way to uncover what mental health means to you? Go on, Matt.
I'll do my best to start. I think contextually for Man Cave as well, I joined us in 2018 full time, and up to that point we'd run programs with 3,000 or 4,000 boys, but not hyper focused on it. So when I joined, it was me and Hunter and one other guy and a few facilitators. We now have 15 staff and 20 facilitators. So I've seen that startup journey, and I've also worked alongside Hunter as we had to manage each other's energy. I'll start with a story. I was sitting on a park bench a few years ago with Hunter, not on the edge of a breakdown, but certainly feeling very, very frustrated because the way that I was working at Man Cave wasn't working. And I had the attitude of, if it has to be done, then I have to do it. And that just led me to feeling like I couldn't get work done because there was too much to do. And I would just look at pulling an all-nighter, work harder. I was having to see a massage therapist because my shoulders and neck were so tight because I was so tense. And he actually just said to me, hey, dude, if you need the afternoon off, just go home, switch off out of work, and let's reset tomorrow. And so through coaching with him, he helped me uncover some of those limiting belief systems about how I need to actually work. And I learned to get smarter through that. I think it came back to, on an individual level, an idea that we have of humanity first, which was the number one behavior that we have at Man Cave. It sits at the very top. And we use that with our relationships with other organizations, but also for ourselves, was to put that humanity first and to realize that the business can come afterwards. And the other thing that helped me independently as well was the idea of work-life balance. Felt really wrong, because I found the work so consuming. I'd be going out to dinners on the weekend and people were wanting to talk to me about Man Cave and masculinity and all the things surrounding that. So it was really hard to manage boundaries. And sometimes I would have to say, hey, do you want me to talk to you as a mate, as a psychologist, as a Man Cave person? Like, what's the hat you want me to wear right now? But then also the idea of work-life rhythm became more familiar to me and more comfortable for me. What's the rhythm and how do I manage my energy? And then it became more accepting as a flow state, as opposed to a sort of a seesaw way of managing things.
Fantastic. I couldn't agree more, Matt. I think when I reflect on where do you start from an individual perspective, I always just like to come back to thinking about mental health and what mental health means to you. And reminding people that everyone has mental health and everyone's different. So we like to refer to mental health as being on a continuum, where it ranges from the positive green end of a continuum, where you're positive and functioning and your mental health is helping you contribute to everyday life, through to the middle of the continuum, which is yellow or orange, where you might start to be at risk of experiencing poor mental health. And then through to the red end of the continuum, where your mental health is having an impact on your daily functioning. But the thing is, everyone's mental health fluctuates on that continuum. And for some people, that's over the course of a year. For some people, it's over the course of a month. For some people, it might be over the course of a day or a week. And so it's really important to everyone, understands this concept. We all have mental health. Our mental health is always going to shift over time. And it's completely natural that at some times you'll be flourishing and that sometimes you might be struggling. So regardless of how you're feeling, there are practical steps that you can put in place to help improve your well-being. And if you are struggling, there are some really helpful supports you can lean on. So I think when I start to think about, myself as an individual, it's so helpful to ground yourself in that understanding that everyone has mental health.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think one of the things, you kind of touched on it a little bit, Matt, and I think when it comes to that almost self-identification, there's one thing that pops up a lot, and that's the stigma surrounding mental health as well. Add to that the stigma that comes in, particularly the new venture spaces of you've just got to push through because this is on you. And, I suppose entrepreneurs are a certain breed. You hear a lot. And so I'd love maybe to hear from you first, Addie, around like, where does stigma come into all of this, particularly for our entrepreneurs?
Good question. Before I leap into that, I'll just add to the previous conversation, which kind of connects. I think the really important place to start, I think, well, it has been for me, has been around awareness. So you know how you can kind of just keep pushing, and you don't really pay attention to how you're going. And I think Matt, your story there is a really great example of actually stopping and checking in with yourself, or having a conversation with somebody else actually helps you build that awareness about yourself, because you can keep pushing until you break, and that's often what happens to us, that we don't do anything until we're really in trouble. So building that awareness, and for me, awareness is about it connects to stigma, because for me it's about checking in with myself about how I'm going, but doing it without criticizing myself. So I'm in a leadership role. I need to be on my best game. I need to be able to engage my team and make sure that I'm supporting everybody. And if I have a bad day, Greg, that idea of the continuum, if I'm dropping down into the struggling end of the continuum, that's not because I'm failing or because I'm letting anyone down. It's just because I'm a human. And things happen that impact on you. So I think stigma, there's lots of different types of stigma. One type of stigma is our own internal stigma. How do we show up, and how do we look at ourselves? What judgments do we make about ourselves? What expectations do we have for ourselves? And that definitely has a role to play in how we think about mental health. And something that's really helped me has been to reframe mental health, that, emotions are emotions, thoughts are thoughts. They're not the be all and end all of who you are as a person. And if you can find a way to observe without getting consumed, then it actually really helps to navigate all of those different emotions. And hopefully that also means that it helps you, think about what you need. Do you need a break? Do you need a weekend off? Do you need to talk to somebody? Do you need to, go out and have some fun, do something completely different, let your hair down, go crazy, whatever it is that you need to actually support your mental health in that moment. But you can't do that when you're consumed by the emotion that you're feeling, rather than being aware of that feeling. So I think that's the difference for me around building, supporting, I suppose, less stigma for myself is about being kind to myself, being observant and pushing myself when I need to, but also pulling back when I need to. And more broadly, I think there's absolutely still stigma, a lot of stigma in our community around mental health. We definitely have a tendency to conflate mental illness and mental health together. And so when we say mental health, people think mental illness, which makes it tricky, because it's very concrete and black and white. There's no shades of grey, there's no continuum, there's no fluctuation and change. You either have a mental illness or you don't, which is not the reality. As Greg pointed out, we move up and down that continuum. And so I think, helping start a conversation about what does mental health mean for you, and how do you broaden that idea of mental health? Do you think about mental health the same way that you do your physical health? Do you do all of the things that you do to look after your physical health, that can you apply that to your mental health? And hopefully that will help start to shift stigma. But it is a real problem, absolutely. And we know our mental health system is quite flawed, and there are many gaps that people fall through which don't help with that stigma as well.
I could not agree more, Addie. And I think while stigma is absolutely still an issue, one of the silver linings of the pandemic has been that it has opened up a real conversation about mental health. So the pandemic impacted everyone's mental health, obviously in different ways. But it has got people talking about mental health probably more than we've ever seen in the past. And we are seeing, some indicators that certain elements of stigma are improving, particularly, your feelings about people who are experiencing poor mental health, people reporting that they're accepting and supportive and all of those sorts of things. But as Addie pointed out, often what's creating an issue and preventing people from seeking support is that self-stigma, you know, the feelings that you have about yourself and your own mental health.
Yeah.
But absolutely, I think we are seeing, you know, awareness has never been greater. The conversation's really opening up now after a really difficult 12 months. So I think it's actually time to really ride that wave and take advantage of the fact that we all experienced a pretty trying time, but it's given us language, it's given us an opportunity, it's been a bit of an equalizer around talking about our mental health.
Yeah, I think that's really great. And one of the questions that someone sent through earlier, I think is really pertinent here, which is around how can you both sustain your own practices and positive mental health when you've also got people who in your teams, whether it's, you know, uni teams or your startup teams or your bigger organizations where maybe you're a leader, how can you maintain your positive mental health whilst also supporting those who maybe are struggling, or, you know, some who do have mental illness as well? Like there's a bigger, I think, sharing of the fact that people are going through those things. So I'd love to hear from yourselves, maybe Matt, if you want to start with how people can start thinking about addressing that balancing act.
Yeah, great question. I think the no-brainer for Man Cave has always been, because we work with boys and we have to be healthy role models when we step into a room with them, that every facilitator and every person that works for Man Cave has to also role model healthy, being a healthy human in all the senses. And so we have these raft of tools that we get to use in workshops that we get to also use in ourselves. I think the balance for me, a lot of it comes back to what are the routines that I have in place for myself, and how do I make sure I come back to those processes. And so for me, it's getting to bed early, it's exercising in the morning, it's all the stuff that we know is really good for us. But just because I know that's my medicine, that doesn't mean I always take it. And then also, what are the practices we have at work? So when I think about a cultural perspective, last year when we went into lockdowns, we introduced, actually we've had them in for years, morning check-ins, where just for half an hour we'd get together every morning, sit in a circle, and the check-in for us is just a tool to talk openly without anyone interrupting you about how you are, and to say that in a psychologically safe space where no one's allowed to respond or question or challenge, and we're all just there to listen and hear it. And I think that comes back to a simple, I think, entrepreneur tip that I'd give, which is you need to have someone that you can just talk to unfiltered. And I've had to coach my girlfriend on doing this for me as well, and saying, I actually don't need you to rescue me right now. I just need you to let me say it. Like, just let me get it off my chest, and then I'm going to be good. And so having someone that you can unfiltered say things to, really helpful and important. And then another practice we have, which I think has helped a lot, it comes back to the stigma side of things, which was a lot of my the things that keep me up at night are thinking about, oh, should I have said that to that person? Did I do the right thing? Was I true to my word? Oh, I should have sent that email. And then what happens? I either pick up my phone and try and reply to emails at 10 p.m. or I stay awake, or I bring in some of the mindfulness training that I've got and go, all right, tune into my body, tune into my breath, go to sleep. But being able to clear that with someone without attachment or judgment of yourself has been a really powerful tool for me. So being able to say, hey, I'm really sorry I didn't get that piece of work to you yesterday. I'll get it to you today, or whatever it is. Or on a more simple level, hey, I just feel like I'm not showing up right now, not being my best. And being able to have that conversation with someone, I think from a workplace culture perspective is really important. Yeah, that'd probably be what I'd put on the table as a start. I know Addie and Greg will have thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, definitely. Addie, did you want to add to that?
I would echo a lot of that. I think it's really hard looking after yourself and looking after a team. I think for me, the best shift in my thinking has been I actually do need to put myself first before I can help other people, which is not my natural inclination. So I think, yeah, like you, Matt, I think having a routine and sticking to a routine is really important for me. So making sure I'm doing the things that I know help support my mental health, and also making a call if I am struggling or feel like I'm not performing at my best, actually, telling someone, talking about it and doing something about it, whether that's a break or shifting my focus. I think the other thing in terms of supporting your team, whether that's your work team or your university team, is that I have had to learn to not take their problems all on myself and have to feel like I need to solve them, because you can't solve everyone's problems. I think, Matt, you talked about this as well, that, the best thing you can probably do for most people is just to listen, but learning how to listen without feeling obliged to do something is really, really hard. So finding a way to listen and just be is a bit of a skill that you have to work on, I think. And that means then that you can actually look out for clues that, you could actually help people by saying, in your team, have you thought about this? Or it sounds like this is a pattern, or, look, this seems to be a trigger, what do you think? And so it gives you that ability to step back and observe in a slightly different way, which I think can be helpful as a leader, but also as a friend if you're working with a group of people. But absolutely trying not to take everyone's problems on is my key thing that I try not to do. Obviously still care deeply for people, but I know that I can't solve their problems, but I can point them in different directions and I can give my advice, and I can be that sounding board for them if they need it.
That's great, Addie. And I think, Greg, I'll let you chime into that in a second, but I just want to also ask a secondary question that we can round out before we go into our breakouts, which is zooming out that next layer around, this is all about, as you said, Matt, things that you need to steer or things that people can steer themselves, because you do need to make sure that you've got your boundaries, your practices, your things in place. But there's a lot of people here who are either starting on that, a new adventure of building businesses, or maybe they're building teams, or maybe they're already in businesses and they're having to, factor these things in. So I'd love to hear a little bit about maybe more from a programs or a tools or that kind of thing perspective, what you think could help people at those stages to start thinking about embedding some of these good practices. Some of them might be practical things like Matt spoke about, but I know that there's a lot of programs and initiatives out there. So I'd love to hear a little bit about some of those, because we've also got a lot of international students here who, aren't from Australia and don't understand the landscape. So giving a few tips around that would be really helpful. Maybe if you want to start, Greg.
Yeah, sure. So look, very quickly, I think Addie hit the nail on the head there. If you're a leader and a small business owner, I always just go back to the oxygen mask analogy. You need to put the oxygen mask on yourself before you can help others. And it's something that I know entrepreneurs and small business owners really struggle with. They feel the weight of the responsibility for themselves, their business, their staff, their family, and they prioritize business over their own mental health. But my view is very strongly a successful and sustainable business is founded on mental health. So prioritizing your own mental health is actually a really good investment. In terms of how do you embed that in an organization, there's a whole bunch of really fantastic tools and resources and support. But in terms of the process, there's three things that we recommend that organizations do to support the mental health of workers. The first is to protect yourself or protect staff from risks to your mental health. So think about what the barriers might be to mental health. And again, in the small business community, we see things like overwork, poor work-life balance, isolation, financial distress, and cash flow issues, and all of those sorts of things. They're risks to our mental health. So what can we put in place to mitigate those risks? So what are the enablers to mental health that we can put in place that can prevent some of those risks from occurring? The second thing that we recommend people do is to promote the positive. So Matt, Addie and I have all talked about a positive strength-based approach. So how do you lean into those strengths? How do you develop your strengths and look at how you can apply them at work or in your business? How can you focus on, what gives you meaning and what drives you? And how can you cultivate really positive relationships at work? They're the things that promote our positive well-being, and that creates a really good buffer. So it helps build your resources. So if you are encountering a bit of struggle, you've got really good resources internally to lean on. Then finally, the third pillar is supporting people who are struggling. Again, we know we all have mental health. At some point in our life, we will all experience, some sort of struggles with our mental health. And so it's okay to put up your hand and ask for help. And organisations and small business owners, it's incumbent on us to support our staff, to support our co-workers. So looking at how you can do that, that might simply be, encouraging people to download the Smiling Mind app. It might be encouraging people to contact the Beyond Blue support service when they need it. But if you're promoting the positive, preventing risks to mental health, and supporting people who are struggling, that's the recipe for a mentally healthy workplace. That's the recipe for a mentally healthy small business. To help you do that, there's amazing resources. Heads Up is Beyond Blue's workplace mental health website. It's got great tools, headsup.org.au. And another great resource is the Australian Small Business and Family Enterprise Ombudsman. What we hear is business health, mental health are completely interrelated and connected. So you've got to keep your business side in check, because that does have flow-on effects to your own mental health. So the Ombudsman has developed a fantastic resource that helps promote positive financial well-being, positive business well-being, and positive mental well-being.
Great. Thanks, Greg. Addie or Matt, did you have anything to add to that before we move into breakout?
It was such a comprehensive answer. What do I add to that? I think at a system level, we know, you can't underestimate, if you're a leader of a business, you can't underestimate the role that you play in the wellbeing space. And I think what Greg has touched on there are the different levels, and they're extremely important. It's that modeling piece, I think, that is so important as well. That, if you're able to model those behaviors where, you're having a check-in in the morning like Matt's team, or you're doing a meditation like our team, or you're having, days off and you're modeling that to your team, then I think that starts to permeate into the system of work. And the mentality and the mindset at work. I think the resources you mentioned, Greg, are absolutely great. We have a small business program. If you're interested in learning about mindfulness and how that might help, it is very individual focused, but there's also some meditations that you can do as a team, and meeting starter meditations that are really simple. They go for a couple of minutes, and they're designed to help you focus your attention on what you're here to achieve in that meeting. So they're very simple resources that are available for free on the Smiling Mind app.
This question, Carrie, you got me thinking. I've been ticking over the last 5-10 minutes trying to listen to you guys talk. It's a really good question. I think when I think about what we use at Man Cave, especially with our facilitators who are on the court every day, but then also organisationally, one of them is PERMA, which many of you will already know, but some of you might not, which is a positive psychology model, which we use to educate facilitators on how they're managing their wellbeing pre, during and post workshop delivery especially. Another one was just coming back for me, especially in helping us scale Man Cave to the fundamentals of creating a workplace. It's not always about the check-ins and other things. Sometimes it can be down to, do I know what my role is at the organisation? Do I know what my goals are, what I'm actually here to achieve? When I go home in the evening, have I done a good job or not? Self-determination theory, or ABC, autonomy, belonging and competence, is a model we've used as another psych theory to model about how we culturally make sure Man Cave is a great place to work. And our number one strategic pillar is that Man Cave is a great organisation to work for, because if we don't get that right, we're not going to attract great talent and we're not going to be able to do great work. And second to that is then delivering programs that foster healthy masculinity. And so to that end, we have our culture code, which I referenced slightly before, which is just the behaviours that we say that we're looking for. And we'll regularly acknowledge people for their behaviour through the culture code, which then helps people again understand what's expected of them. and also to have coaching conversations when people are behaving out of line with our culture code. That would say something that comes later on, early days. If you're just getting started, I don't think you need that. And maybe this is just a little side one for me, but two frameworks that have really helped me personally with my sport, with my leadership and work has been the Headspace app was the place that I started. Had some amazing videos in there that reframed how to think about my emotions. So Addie, I'm sorry if they're a direct competitor of yours, but they do amazing work as well. And they've got free videos online. But the other one is also ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy. It's called Acceptance Commitment Therapy, but really it's just an amazing model for psychological flexibility and adaptability. And I love a silver bullet. And that for me is the framework of thinking about being human that combines being present, getting in touch with what matters to you, taking action in alignment with your values, and being able to do that without sort of feeling the weight of the world on your shoulders. So yeah, Russ Harris, who has really been the leader in Australia with that movement, has some amazing resources that you could use with him as well.
Amazing. So as Anna's mentioned, Anna and Nikki have mentioned in the chat, we will collate a list of all of those amazing resources and programs and frameworks and models and make sure that everyone gets access to them.
Anonymous, surprised they're all from Anonymous. Anonymous has a lot to say today. So the question is, as an international student, we don't always have the luxury to switch off. With uni workload, we have to juggle part-time work, internships, etc. And facing job rejections can get very overwhelming. Do you have any advice on how to prioritize mental health with all of this? I can say that's a big sigh, Matt. It's a lot, isn't it?
I'll start. I guess my first thought is I've never been in that situation before. I did a gap year in the UK, but I was working at a school, and I was very much welcomed into that community and had a support system around me. So dare I say it, I think there'd probably be other people here that would be more equipped to answer that than I am from a lived experience perspective. My one suggestion would be, how can you connect into a community here and find a group here that you're connected to through your interests, not just other people that have moved from the same country as you, but through your hobbies that you enjoy doing, not just sport, a whole variety of things.
Thanks, Matt.
Yeah, I'd probably add to that. I also have never been an international student, but I definitely worked all the way through my university career, which was ridiculously long, and I was extremely poor. And I think I agree with you, Matt. I think it doesn't have to be a huge thing that you need to do to look after your mental health. I think it can be in those in between times where you give yourself a small break, where you find, it's something that gives you joy and passion. If it's joining a club or finding that network of people that think the same way or are going through the same thing as you, that you can share a conversation with, they're all really important things for your mental health. I don't feel as though you have to spend several hours at the gym or meditate for an hour or go and talk to a psychologist every day. Like it doesn't have to require a big investment of your time. It's more about learning about how your mind works, how you relate to things. What are the things that are showing up for you? If you're finding that there are rejections with work opportunities, catch yourself and make sure you're aware of the commentary that might be going through your head when you experience that, because it's often those negative, critical thinking patterns that we get ourselves into that really hurt and feel terrible. So finding some of those patterns and diffusing them however you can is really important. But and I would say our mental health is really complex and it's hard. It's really hard to look after. So every small thing will make a difference.
Great suggestions, Addie. And look, for me, if you're in that situation, again, I haven't been an international student, but sounds like you've got a lot on. And this is where your self-care basics become really important. And Matt said before, he knows what he needs to do, but it doesn't matter how much we know. Sometimes it's just, that gap between your intention and your action can be quite a wide gap. So it's really about going back to, getting a balanced routine, eating well, exercising, staying connected with family and friends, managing your intake of news in times like this, for example. These things sound really basic, but the basics are what matter, particularly when you're in an environment where you've got a lot on and you are really stretched.
Yeah, and I think to add to that, I know a lot of international students maybe don't know where to start for that community perspective, which Matt and Greg and Addie all spoke about. And there's two really simple ones that I have found really work for students in particular. One of them is Meetup. If you haven't heard of it already, it's great. You can Google something, you can search in that function something as simple as knitting, and there will be some kind of meetup about knitting with people who care about it, and it's just casually run. So they're really great forums. And then the other one is obviously the Monash entrepreneurship community. There's a whole series of events like this, but also just, interesting people that you can just talk to and build friendships with if entrepreneurship is something you're interested in, because you can then obviously share common stories and things as well. So I think those two are really great. And obviously the team can direct you to that entrepreneurship side of things, but even just something as simple as that, doing a quick little search and seeing, something new to try.
Fantastic. And I was just about to post the link to our community in there, but links don't work on Zoom chat, so I'll share that in the follow-up email. Learning on the fly. And thank you for all of your insights there. We've got one more question from Anonymous. When do you need to draw the line between being a manager and being a counsellor? Feel free to jump in, whoever would like to go first. We can go reverse model, and Carol and Greg, you can kick us off if you'd like.
So look, my advice is there's a really clear line, and managers shouldn't be counsellors. And I think that's something that we actually try and instill in everything we do. I think Addie mentioned before, you've got to be really clear about what you take on. And a lot of the time, our role is to listen, to empathise, and to encourage people to get support when they need it. So I really, I would encourage people, if you're a manager, don't try to medicalise, don't try to diagnose. That's not the role that you can play in the workplace. But what you can do is you can reflect on, some of the things that Matt talked about earlier. How can we design this role for someone that, embraces their strengths? How can we support them through some of our internal supports, maybe in EAP or by referring them to Beyond Blue? How can I just be there for them as a person, and making sure that they're, deriving meaning and purpose out of their work? So my advice is definitely know that boundary and stick to it, and focus on what you can do as a manager and the role that you can play. If you think that someone does need more support, that's where you can refer them to their GP, refer them to the Beyond Blue support service, refer them to other programs like New Access for small business owners, for example. So that's where you can encourage them to get that support.
Yeah, I would agree. A good counsellor is not your manager. Your manager is a manager, and you can listen and refer and guide and mentor and coach. But knowing our role is really important, and it's easy, like I said before, easy to slip into that, want to try and solve people's problems, but it's not the role usually of a manager. So absolutely make sure that you've got those referral pathways. If you are a manager and you it's great to have a easily accessible list of different options that you can give to people. EAP providers are really great, but often not available or not established in small businesses. So make sure you have other pathways. And like Greg said, through your everyone's GP, you can always get access to somebody. So, and if you've got people that are wanting you to be a counsellor, I think there's a really important opportunity there to help them understand, why there needs to be a difference between your role as a manager and a counsellor. And that might be an opportunity to help encourage help-seeking behaviour, which sometimes, often we all probably need that nudge or guidance to go and seek the right help.
I think to add to that just quickly, Addie, one of the things that I find happens a lot in organisations, maybe not necessarily startups, because you are figuring it out, and so you might need to go to certain organisations to get that initial advice. But a lot of organisations don't necessarily always do a good job of telling you what's available. So if you're a manager and you're recognising that your team's struggling, they don't have what they need, obviously you can, look to some of the places that we've spoken about, but also speaking, to other people in the organisation or to HR or people in culture teams, because there is normally something in place. Sometimes they're just not very good at publicising it. So, there's usually at least like a kit or a policy or something in place. So I think if you're not sure, always go there, because sometimes they're actually really good at helping you find that delineation based on what your organisation does as well.
And just one last comment there. If you are a manager and you have a staff member who's struggling, it is really critical that you look after yourself as well. That can become a weight on your shoulders that many people take on, like Addie's said before. So again, it's important that you lean on those supports as well, that you can, talk to your peers and get some advice, or use the same supports that you're recommending to your staff member if you feel like you need it as well. But don't feel that burden of responsibility, and don't feel the need that you need to do that alone.
Can I jump in, Anna? Is that all right? I think there's two questions that came up for me. What organisation am I working in, and what's the culture of this place? And what's my role for this person? So I mentioned the first question because at Man Cave, I think the risk we face is that our managers can often be our coaches, our facilitators, our life coaches, and we slip into facilitating each other because it's fun. But it's not fun if that person has serious challenges they're trying to work through. So we have to manage boundaries more so in that way. Whereas when I worked at PwC in the corporate environment, it was like, hey, I actually really need some help here. My mental health's not great, and I actually need to speak to someone. And the workplace environment was very different. And so then when I think about what's my role for this person with my team, it's thinking about my role for this person is to create a great place for them to work. And if they need other supports, then I want to make sure they have them. So sometimes I'll just ask my team, do you have someone you can talk to about this? Do you have the support networks outside? Those sorts of basic questions where I'm letting myself go of the responsibility of solving it for them and understanding the limits of my role. Those have been some helpful ways of managing, I think, relationships in a workplace environment at Man Cave, and especially in a startup environment where the line is really blurry. And just one last thought, and then I'll hand over the mic, was just the question before. I think a big source of anxiety and struggle that can come sometimes from what is in my control and what's outside of my control. And one of the best exercises I've always come back to is what's happening in my life that I'm not happy with. Where do I want to be? What's in my control? What's outside of my control? And then going, okay, cool. Well, what can I do about it now? And that is a tool that I really got from a guy called Viktor Frankl, who survived many years in camped in Nazi Germany, who wrote an amazing book called Man's Search for Meaning. And he, produced these amazing skills, and during his time there, that he sort of passed on through this amazing little book. So I come back to that as well. Thanks, Anna. Thanks for letting me be cheeky with the last word as well.
Honestly, I think we could all go for hours. That was 2 questions out of, I think, 15, and not even including the pre-submitted questions. So there's a lot to discuss. And look, thank you, all 3 of you, and Caro, all 4 of you, for your time today. It's been really great. Nikki and I sitting here nodding our heads away. Might have to get a massage. And really looking forward to actually combing through this event again, and sharing all of the resources and things that you've all mentioned today with everyone who was here and those who couldn't make it but are keen to hear about how it went. Dave, I can see that you're hiding away there in the background, and I'm wondering if you have any last words that you wanted to say before we wrap up and close off this event.
Thank you, Anna. Given my size, I think it'll be a bit hard for me to hide away. Look, thank you very much to the panel. I found this very, very interesting. I wish, reflecting back 20, 30 years ago and building businesses, if I had have had access to these resources, I think it would have been a far easier journey. Humans tend to be very, very hard on themselves. And I think for me, it's really about recognizing that you are being so hard on yourself and then having a plan to do something about that. But one thing in terms of students out there in startup world, one of the things I neglected was actually constant contact with my friends. You're so busy that you tended to push that aside as not a priority. And I'd really encourage you never to do that. Make the time, make sure that you're in constant contact with that support network around you, and laugh a lot. Just go out and have a darn good time. As well as all of the other things. As you all know, I love my surfing. So you've got to have that outlet. Otherwise, you're just going to be working 80, 90 hours a week, and your life will slide by very, very quickly. So on that note, be positive. Make sure you interact with all of those other human beings around you that are such a great support. And just a big thank you from Monash and from Luna on behalf of Luna to our amazing panel. I think we've all learned a great deal today. Thank you very much.